In the heart of Cairo, where sun-bleached stone meets morning hush, a line of mourners moves solemnly toward a waiting grave. Soldiers stand watch, faces masked with duty. There is a coffin at the center, surrounded by weeping family, distant friends, and strangers lost in thought. But inside that coffin, something extraordinary is happening. It carries the weight of tradition and a secret so audacious it could rewrite the rules of escape. Under the gaze of the Egyptian military, a life-and-death gamble is silently unfolding. This is the story of Mossad's fake funeral, one of the most remarkable sleight-of-hand escapes in the world of espionage. For decades after Israel was founded in 1948, the Middle East lived in perpetual shadow. Fear, suspicion, and distrust crept through every government office, every checkpoint, every crowded bazaar. Egypt and Israel were locked in a cold war without end, their spies and state secrets dancing a deadly ballet across borders. The region had become a chessboard where every move carried life or death consequences. Intelligence agencies on both sides developed vast networks of informants, safe houses, and covert operatives. The Egyptian Mukhabarat, the nation's intelligence service, had grown increasingly sophisticated in its counterintelligence operations. They planted false information, ran double agents, and maintained constant surveillance on anyone suspected of ties to foreign powers. Egyptian officers studied the tactics of British intelligence, which had operated in the region for generations, and adapted those methods to their own purposes. Meanwhile, Israel's survival depended on knowing what its neighbors planned. Mossad operatives worked under deep cover, assuming new identities and building lives that could withstand scrutiny. They ran businesses, married into local families, and became part of the social fabric of Arab cities. The work was slow, methodical, and extraordinarily dangerous. An operative might spend years establishing credibility before attempting a single intelligence-gathering mission. In Cairo and Alexandria, Jewish communities became both witnesses and pawns. They managed to survive through silence and cunning, their lives hemmed in by suspicion. For Mossad, the Israeli intelligence service every day brought new threats. Operatives in Arab lands faced police raids and informers. After the disaster of the Suez Crisis in 1956, Mossad's networks in Egypt grew fragile. A single mistake could mean imprisonment, torture, or death for agents and local allies. The 1956 war had been a turning point. When Israel, Britain, and France coordinated an attack on Egypt following President Nasser's nationalization of the Suez Canal, the political fallout was immense. International pressure forced the invading powers to withdraw, but the damage to covert operations was irreversible. Egyptian authorities, now hypervigilant and supported by Soviet advisors, began systematic sweeps of neighborhoods where foreigners lived. Jewish residents came under particular scrutiny, their movements tracked, their mail opened, their phone lines tapped. The intelligence war became a battle of patience and nerves. Egyptian security services employed torture to extract confessions, real or fabricated. They understood that breaking one operative could unravel an entire network. Prison conditions were brutal, designed to destroy both body and spirit. Interrogators used sleep deprivation, beatings, and psychological manipulation. Some prisoners were held in underground cells where no sunlight ever penetrated, losing track of time and reality itself. For Mossad handlers in Tel Aviv, the distance from their operatives in Egypt felt like an impossible gulf. Communication was sporadic and dangerous. Dead drops, coded newspaper advertisements, and brief radio transmissions were the fragile threads connecting agents to their homeland. Every message sent increased the risk of detection. Radio direction finding equipment, supplied by the Soviets, could triangulate a transmission in minutes. Survival depended on secrecy deeper than the Nile's waters. Mossad's mission was not just to gather secrets, but to protect its own from traps set by Egyptian police and counterintelligence. Within these invisible battles, a new kind of escape plan would soon be born, a plan daring enough to use a funeral as its vehicle. In Cairo and Alexandria, Jewish families lived under the weight of suspicion. Their traditions, their faith, and their daily routines were closely watched by police and neighbors alike. The scent of mistrust lingered everywhere. Some survived by erasing their identity in public, resorting to quiet smiles and faint whispers. The Jewish community in Egypt had ancient roots, stretching back thousands of years. By the middle of the 20th century, approximately 75,000 Jews lived in Egypt, concentrated mainly in Cairo and Alexandria. They had been merchants, bankers, professionals, and artisans contributing significantly to Egyptian society. Many spoke Arabic as their first language and considered themselves fully Egyptian, distinguished only by their faith. But the political winds had shifted violently. The establishment of Israel in 1948 and the subsequent Arab-Israeli wars transformed Jewish Egyptians from citizens into suspected enemy agents overnight. The government enacted laws restricting Jewish property ownership and business operations. Jewish schools faced closure, strict government oversight. Young Jewish men were barred from military service, a clear signal that they were not trusted. Banks froze accounts without explanation. Police could search Jewish homes at any hour without warrants. Daily life became a careful dance around danger. Jewish families learned to speak in code, even at home, assuming their walls had ears. Children were taught never to discuss family matters in school. Synagogue attendance became a calculated risk, as informers often lurked among the worshippers. The community's religious leaders walked a tightrope, trying to maintain spiritual life while avoiding any action that could be construed as political. Economic pressure mounted steadily. Jewish-owned businesses found their licenses mysteriously revoked or faced endless bureaucratic obstacles. Suppliers refused to deliver goods, and customers stayed away, fearing guilt by association. Professional Jewish doctors, lawyers, and engineers found themselves gradually excluded from their fields. Some converted to Islam or Christianity in desperate attempts to protect their families. Others simply waited, hoping the storm would pass. Amid this, Mossad built a secret cell called Unit 131. This group, drawn from Egyptian Jews known for courage and resourcefulness, was led by officers like Avraham Dar, hiding under the name John Darling. The unit's job was clear: carry out missions, gather intelligence, and keep doors open for those who needed to escape. Their allegiance was invisible, but their risk was real. Recruitment for Unit 1-3. One required extraordinary caution. Mossad handlers identified potential operatives through careful observation, looking for individuals with strong nerves, quick minds, and deep commitment to Israel. Many recruits were young, in their 20s and early 30s, old enough to move freely but young enough to take risks. They came from diverse backgrounds but shared a common thread of Zionist conviction and a willingness to sacrifice everything for a cause larger than themselves. Training took place in secret locations, often under the guise of social gatherings or business meetings. Operatives learned basic tradecraft, encryption, surveillance detection, and emergency protocols. They practiced maintaining cover identities until their false personas became second nature. They memorized codes and recognition signals. Most critically, they learned how to recognize when they were being watched and how to disappear if compromise seemed imminent. Then came the disaster. In 1954, a sabotage operation went wrong. Known later as the Lavon affair, Israeli agents tried to frame local Egyptian factions for bombings to destabilize the regime and sway international opinion. Instead, Egyptian police uncovered the network. Members were captured, interrogated, and some were sentenced to death or life behind bars. The operation, codenamed Operation Susanna, had been breathtakingly reckless. Small teams planted bombs in American and British-owned targets, including libraries and cinemas, hoping to create an atmosphere of instability that would convince Western powers to maintain their military presence in Egypt. The logic was that instability would serve Israeli interests by weakening Nasser's government. But the bombs caused minimal damage, and Egyptian investigators quickly traced them back to the Jewish operatives. The arrests came swiftly and brutally. Egyptian security forces swept through neighborhoods, rounding up anyone connected to the suspects. Interrogations lasted days, with prisoners subjected to techniques designed to break them psychologically and physically. Some operatives confessed under torture, providing names and details that led to more arrests. The network collapsed like a house of cards. Two of the captured operatives, Moshe Marzouk and Shmuel Azar, were sentenced to death and hanged in January 1955. Their executions sent shockwaves through both the Jewish community in Egypt and Israeli intelligence circles. Others received lengthy prison sentences. Families of the convicted faced harassment and persecution. The broader Jewish community suffered increased scrutiny and suspicion. Fear turned inward, making every meeting, every handshake a risk. Agents disappeared or lived in hiding. For Mossad, the crisis was clear without a dramatic rescue. What remained of their Egyptian network would vanish forever into the silent halls of Cairo's prisons. After the devastating failure of the Lavon affair, Mossad faced a harsh new reality. Its agents and allies trapped in Egypt were sitting targets. Imprisoned colleagues shattered networks, and a hostile regime tightening its grip meant there was no room for error. In this atmosphere of fear and urgency, a fresh plan was needed, one that would leverage Egypt's own customs to blindside its surveillance and security. Abraham Dar, the Mossad officer who operated under the British cover name John Darling, conceived an extraordinary idea. Dar was a veteran of Israel's intelligence wars. A man who understood that sometimes the most effective weapons were not guns or explosives, but psychological insight and cultural knowledge. He had spent years studying Egyptian society, learning its rhythms, customs, and unspoken rules. Dar knew that funerals in Egyptian society were deeply respected and heavily protected rituals. Egyptian soldiers and police rarely interfered in these solemn ceremonies out of cultural respect and fear of provoking outrage among civilians. This respect created a unique opening that could be exploited to move people or secrets unseen. Egyptian funeral traditions were sacred across religious lines. Whether Muslim, Christian, or Jewish, funerals commanded reverence. The dead were to be buried quickly, within 24 hours when possible, according to both Islamic and Jewish law. Funeral processions moved through streets with a kind of immunity, as onlookers stopped their activities and offered prayers. Even hardened security officers would hesitate before disrupting such a ceremony, knowing that interference could spark riots or, at a minimum, severe criticism from religious authorities. Dar also understood the bureaucratic machinery surrounding death in Egypt. Death certificates, burial permits, and cemetery authorizations all followed predictable patterns. The system was rigid, but also paradoxically exploitable. Officials processing these documents rarely questioned them closely, especially when they bore the proper stamps and signatures. Death was common enough that paperwork became routine. The plan was deceptively simple on paper. A fake funeral procession, complete with mourners, religious rites, and a coffin designed to conceal not death, but life. The coffin would become a vessel of escape, traveling right through the eyes of the enemy without raising suspicion. But the logistics were anything but simple. Egyptian checkpoints were thorough, and the authorities knew the Jewish cemeteries well. False death certificates had to be flawless, and the timing of the procession had to be precise. The coffin itself needed a hidden compartment large enough to hold a person or documents, disguised to withstand any brief inspection. Creating convincing forged documents required expertise and access. Mossad's document specialists in Tel Aviv studied genuine Egyptian death certificates, analyzing the paper quality, ink composition, official seals, and signature styles. They obtained blank forms through various channels, sometimes from sympathetic Egyptian officials, sometimes through theft. Every detail mattered. The wrong watermark or an outdated form could trigger suspicion. The name on the death certificate had to be someone real but unverifiable. Choosing a common name risked collision with an actual recent death. Choosing too unusual a name might prompt questions. The solution was to use the identity of someone who had actually died, but whose death had not been officially registered, a situation not uncommon in Egypt's vast bureaucracy. Poor families sometimes delayed registering deaths due to the costs involved or the simple distance from government offices. The coffin design presented unique challenges. It needed to appear completely normal from the outside, matching the style used in Jewish burials, yet contain a secret compartment sophisticated enough to sustain life. Craftsmen, working in absolute secrecy, built a false bottom into the coffin. The hidden space was just large enough for a person to lie flat, with carefully disguised air holes to prevent suffocation. The compartment had to be accessible from the outside through a mechanism that would not be visible even upon close inspection. Weight distribution was critical. An empty coffin carried by pallbearers would feel suspiciously light. To solve this, the designers included removable weights that could be adjusted depending on whether the compartment held a person, documents, or other materials. The goal was to make the coffin feel appropriately heavy without being impossible to carry. Dar coordinated with local Jewish operatives who were willing to risk everything. They secured clergy cooperation, knowing their voices in prayer and ceremony would provide cover. Every step required flawless choreography. The wrong move could mean exposure, arrest, or worse. Finding a rabbi willing to participate was perhaps the most delicate aspect. The operation required a religious figure whose presence would lend authenticity, but who also understood he was participating in an act of deception that violated the sanctity of funeral rites. The rabbi chosen was a man of deep conviction, who believed that saving a life, according to Jewish law, superseded almost all other commandments. His participation would be a calculated moral compromise, prioritizing human survival over ritual purity. The mourners had to be carefully selected and rehearsed. They needed to display genuine, seeming grief without overdoing the performance. Too much emotion might seem theatrical. Too little would appear suspicious. Most were family members of imprisoned operatives, giving them authentic motivation for their sorrow. Their tears would be real, even if their purpose was deception. Timing the operation required extensive surveillance of Egyptian security patterns. Mossad operatives noted when checkpoints were most and least vigilant, when shift changes occurred, and when guards were tired or distracted. They mapped funeral routes from various neighborhoods to cemeteries, identifying which paths offered the best combination of legitimacy and minimal scrutiny. This plan was an act of subterfuge and a profound gamble that used tradition, religion, and human empathy as weapons against a ruthless enemy. It was a plan born from desperation, ingenuity, and the indomitable will to survive. The plan moved from idea to execution with painstaking care. In the weeks leading up to the operation, Mossad agents forged death certificates that appeared flawless in Egypt's strict bureaucratic system. Every detail had to be exactly right: the name, the date, even official stamps. These papers were the key to passing through checkpoints without suspicion. The forging operation took place in a secure location far from Egypt, likely in a Mossad facility in Israel or Europe. Document specialists worked under intense pressure, using period-appropriate typewriters, ink that matched aged Egyptian government supplies, and paper stock obtained through covert channels. They studied photographs of genuine stamps and seals, creating perfect replicas that could withstand examination by trained officials. Each stamp had to be applied with precisely the right amount of pressure and ink. Too light, and it would appear fake. Too heavy, and it would look suspicious. The specialists practiced on dozens of test documents before moving to the actual forgeries. Signatures were traced and retraced until they could be reproduced with fluid, natural strokes that showed no hesitation or artifice. The death certificate listed a cause of death that was common and uncontroversial: heart failure, an ailment that required no elaborate medical investigation. The age of the deceased was carefully chosen to match the operative being smuggled, avoiding any discrepancy that might be noticed. Family information was filled in accurately for the cover identity, including names and addresses that could be verified if checked. Next came the coffin. It was no ordinary box. Expert craftsmen, working in secret, built a hidden compartment inside, large enough to hold a person or valuable intelligence. The coffin had to look genuine and withstand brief inspections without raising doubt. The coffin was constructed using traditional Egyptian methods and materials. The wood was sourced locally to match what would be expected in an authentic Jewish burial. The exterior was finished in a simple, respectful manner consistent with Jewish funeral traditions, which typically avoided ostentatious decoration. Inside, the visible portion was lined with white cloth, as was customary. The hidden compartment below the false bottom was a masterpiece of engineering. It measured approximately 170 centimeters long, 45 centimeters wide, and 30 centimeters deep. Enough space for an average-sized person to lie flat but not sit up, The false bottom was constructed with such precision that the seam was virtually invisible. It could be released by pressing two specific points simultaneously, a mechanism impossible to trigger accidentally. Air circulation was achieved through tiny holes drilled at strategic points and disguised as natural wood grain variations. These holes were just large enough to allow oxygen flow but too small to be noticed in a casual inspection. The interior was padded with thin foam to provide minimal comfort and reduce noise from any movement. The craftsmen tested the compartment extensively. Volunteers spent hours inside to ensure the air supply was adequate and the space was bearable, though certainly not comfortable. They practiced getting in and out quickly, refining the mechanism until it operated silently and smoothly. Every aspect was tested until failure was no longer a possibility they could afford to consider. Local Jewish collaborators played a vital role. Some attended the funeral as mourners, their grief part of the ruse. A sympathetic clergyman provided religious legitimacy to the ceremony, adding weight to the procession and dissuading any curiosity from guards. The mourners were briefed extensively but told only what they needed to know. Compartmentalized information was a basic security principle. If someone was arrested and interrogated, they could not reveal what they did not know. Most mourners believed they were participating in helping someone escape, but few knew the exact mechanics of how or who was being moved. Each mourner had a specific role. Some were to walk closest to the coffin, serving as pallbearers or immediate family. Others formed the outer circle, creating a human buffer between the coffin and any authorities. A few were assigned as lookouts, positioned to watch for signs of unusual security interest or surveillance. They had predetermined signals, adjusting a hat, lighting a cigarette, or stopping to tie a shoe, each gesture carrying a specific meaning to alert others of potential danger. The rabbi received special preparation. He needed to conduct a convincing funeral service that would satisfy any observers while moving the procession efficiently along its planned route. He memorized traditional prayers and blessings, practicing until they flowed naturally. His performance had to balance religious authenticity with operational necessity. On the day, the mood was tense but controlled. The funeral procession wound its way through Cairo streets, Egyptians watching in respectful silence. Soldiers observed but did not interfere. Funerals were sacred, and even in times of war, they commanded deference. The morning arrived with Cairo's typical chaos. Vendors calling out their wares, children running through narrow streets, the distant call to prayer echoing from minarets. Into this ordinary scene, the funeral procession emerged from a modest home in a Jewish neighborhood. The timing had been calculated to coincide with late morning, when street traffic would provide cover, but visibility would allow authorities to see that everything appeared normal. The procession formed with practiced precision. The rabbi led, chanting prayers in Hebrew, his voice carrying the ancient words of mourning. Behind him, 6 pallbearers lifted the coffin to their shoulders. The weight felt right, heavy enough to seem authentic but manageable for the journey ahead. Family members walked directly behind the coffin, weeping and supporting one another. Other mourners filled in around them, creating a moving crowd of perhaps 30 to 40 people. As they moved through the streets, ordinary Egyptians stopped and stood respectfully. Muslim shopkeepers paused their work, placing hands over hearts in a universal gesture of condolence. Christian neighbors made the sign of the cross. This was the power of death in Egyptian culture. It commanded respect across all boundaries. But the mourners could feel eyes upon them. Plainclothes security officers were surely watching, as they always did. Some might be following at a distance. The key was to give them nothing unusual to focus on, to be so perfectly normal that surveillance would find the scene boring and unworthy of closer scrutiny. Every step was rehearsed. No sudden movements, no raised voices. The coffin was carefully guarded, yet moved with solemn grace. The risk was immense, but discipline and faith in the plan held the team together. The coffin, heavy with its hidden life, moved steadily through the streets of Cairo. Army checkpoints stood like silent sentinels, their guards vigilant yet respectful of the funeral procession passing before them. The first checkpoint appeared ahead, a temporary barrier manned by 3 soldiers. Traffic had been stopped, vehicles queuing for inspection. The funeral procession approached, and the rabbi raised his voice, chanting louder, making clear through sound alone that something sacred was passing through. The soldiers glanced at each other, then at their sergeant. Inside the hidden compartment, the operative lay in absolute stillness, controlling breath, fighting the natural human response to confined spaces. Panic was the enemy. Training had prepared for this moment, but training could not eliminate the primal fear of being trapped. The air was thin but breathable. Sound was muffled, but voices could be heard, providing critical information about what was happening outside. The sergeant at the checkpoint stepped forward, raising a hand. The procession slowed but did not stop completely, maintaining momentum that would be awkward to interrupt. The rabbi continued his prayers, not acknowledging the soldier directly, as if in a trance of grief and devotion. The pallbearers kept walking, their pace steady and reverent. The sergeant looked at the coffin, at the weeping family members, at the crowd of mourners. His training told him to inspect everything, but his culture told him this was sacred ground. He made a quick calculation. The paperwork had been filed. The procession was following proper routes to the Jewish cemetery, and interfering would cause a scene that his superiors would not appreciate. He waved them through. The procession continued, but tension did not ease. There would be more checkpoints, more chances for discovery. The route had been planned to minimize these encounters while maintaining the appearance of following the expected path to the cemetery. Any deviation from normal funeral routes might trigger suspicion. At one checkpoint, tension peaked as a soldier approached the coffin. Hearts froze. The guard's hand lingered on the lid, almost opening it. But a quick prayer, the mourner's watchful eyes, and the weight of cultural respect held him back. The coffin remained sealed. This soldier was younger, perhaps less experienced, more inclined to follow regulations literally. He circled the coffin, looking at it from different angles. The pallbearers stood still, holding the weight, sweat beginning to form despite the morning coolness. The rabbi stepped closer, positioning himself between the soldier and the coffin, continuing his prayers but louder now, filling the air with Hebrew liturgy. The soldier's hand moved toward the lid. One of the mourners, an elderly woman, let out a wail of grief so piercing and authentic that everyone within earshot felt it. The soldier hesitated. Opening a coffin in front of a grieving family was not something done lightly, especially without specific orders or clear cause for suspicion. His superior, a lieutenant standing a few meters away, noticed the delay and walked over. The two men exchanged words in Arabic, too quiet for the mourners to hear clearly. The lieutenant glanced at the funeral procession, at the paperwork the rabbi carried, at the grief-stricken faces. He shook his head once, a clear signal. The younger soldier stepped back. The lieutenant waved the procession forward. Inside the compartment, the operative had heard everything. The sound of footsteps circling the coffin, the muffled Arabic conversation, the woman's wail, the long silence that stretched impossibly. When the coffin began moving again, relief was tempered by the knowledge that more obstacles lay ahead. The procession continued, weaving through traffic and curious onlookers until it reached the edge of a diplomatic zone. Here, Egyptian authority dulled, and Mossad's allies stepped in. The coffin was quietly transferred to a secure vehicle, its cargo finally safe. The transition happened with careful choreography. The diplomatic zone was near the cemetery, but not at it. A deliberate choice that allowed the procession to reach relatively safe territory while maintaining the illusion of a normal burial. A vehicle with diplomatic plates waited in a quiet street, its presence explained by a diplomatic staff member attending the funeral to pay respects, not unusual given the small size of Cairo's foreign communities. The coffin was loaded into the vehicle under the guise of transporting it the final distance to the cemetery. Mourners gathered around, blocking sight lines from any casual observers. Inside the vehicle, away from public view, the hidden compartment was finally opened. Inside, the agent or secret documents emerged alive. The fake funeral had succeeded in piercing the iron walls of suspicion and surveillance. It was a moment of silent triumph born from devotion, courage, and sheer ingenuity. An escape woven from the fabric of death itself. The operative who emerged was physically exhausted, but mentally alert. immediately debriefed by Mossad handlers waiting in the diplomatic vehicle. Every detail of the journey was recorded, including which checkpoints showed the most interest, what questions were asked, and how close they came to discovery. This intelligence would inform future operations. For the mourners who had risked everything, there was no celebration, only the quiet knowledge that they had helped save a life. They dispersed carefully, returning to their homes by different routes, resuming their lives under Egyptian suspicion. Some would eventually make their own escapes to Israel. Others would remain in Egypt, living in the shadows, their role in this operation never acknowledged. The success of the fake funeral escape was tempered by the wider fallout of the era's covert operations. The Lavon affair, also known as Operation Susanna, cast a long shadow over Israel's intelligence efforts in Egypt. What began as an attempt to create chaos and instability in Cairo ended in disaster for Israel's reputation. After Egyptian authorities exposed several operatives in the failed sabotage campaign, Mossad's network was gutted. Some operatives faced death sentences or long imprisonment. The scandal sparked deep political turmoil within Israel, leading to resignations and power struggles. Defense Minister Pinhas Lavon stepped down amid accusations of authorizing the flawed operation, while others sought to deflect blame. The political earthquake in Israel was profound. Prime Minister Moshe Sharett, who had opposed aggressive covert actions, found his position weakened. David Ben-Gurion, who had temporarily retired, used the crisis to return to power, eventually replacing Sharett. The intelligence community faced harsh criticism and internal investigations. Questions of who authorized what and who knew what dominated Israeli politics for years. The scandal revealed fundamental problems in how Israel's intelligence services operated. The chain of command was unclear, with different factions pursuing conflicting agendas. Communication between field operatives and headquarters was inadequate. Most damning was the realization that the operation had been poorly conceived from the start, based on faulty assumptions about Egyptian society and Western responses. Egypt responded by tightening its grip on Jewish communities and espionage suspects, making future covert activities far more difficult. Yet the fake funeral operation remained a rare bright spot of ingenuity and survival during this painful period. President Nasser used the Lavon affair as justification for increased surveillance and control. The Jewish community, already under pressure, faced new restrictions. More families chose to leave Egypt, creating a slow but steady exodus that would accelerate in the coming years. By 1967, after the Six-Day War, most Egyptian Jews would be expelled or would flee, ending thousands of years of Jewish presence in Egypt. The fake funeral operation, precisely because it succeeded and remained largely secret, offered a blueprint for future extractions. Mossad learned that cultural understanding could be as powerful as any weapon. The operation demonstrated that sometimes the best way to hide was not in shadows, but in plain sight, wrapped in rituals and customs so sacred that even enemies would hesitate to violate them. Intelligence analysts studied the operation extensively, identifying lessons that would shape future tactics. The importance of cultural intelligence was elevated in training programs. Operatives heading to Arab countries spent more time learning language, customs, religious practices, and social dynamics. The idea that local culture could provide operational opportunities became central to Mossad doctrine. The lessons learned shaped Mossad's future tactics, blending cultural insight with audacious deception. It set a precedent for extracting valuable agents from impossible situations by using firepower, faith, and human ritual as shields. Though much of this remained secret for decades, the operation's spirit echoes in Mossad's later iconic missions. In the years that followed, Mossad would execute numerous legendary operations. The capture of Adolf Eichmann in Argentina in 1960, the daring rescue of hostages at Entebbe in 1976, the assassination of terrorist leaders across Europe and the Middle East all carried elements of the same innovative thinking that made the fake funeral operation possible. Each mission required understanding the environment, exploiting cultural assumptions, and maintaining absolute operational discipline. The fake funeral also established a precedent for using religious and cultural cover in intelligence work. In later years, Mossad operatives would pose as priests, rabbis, aid workers, and religious pilgrims to access areas or people otherwise unreachable. The lesson was clear. The world's respect for religious practice and tradition created vulnerabilities that could be exploited by those willing to blur ethical lines in the service of national security. Within Mossad itself, the fake funeral became part of institutional legend, a story told to recruits to illustrate that intelligence work required more than technical skills or physical courage. It required imagination, cultural sensitivity, and the ability to see opportunities where others saw only obstacles. The operation became a teaching case, studied in training programs as an example of how constraints could be turned into advantages. The fake funeral operation stands as a rare fusion of faith, culture, and cunning in the shadowy world of espionage. It reveals a truth often hidden in intelligence work, the human dimension beneath the cloak of deception. Here, sacred rituals became shields, prayers a form of resistance, and a coffin a vessel of hope. This mission raises profound questions about ethics and survival. In a world where truth is weaponized and lives hang in the balance, how far can deception stretch before losing its morality? For Mossad, the answer lay in necessity, a willingness to blur lines when the cost of exposure meant death or imprisonment. The ethical complexity of the operation continues to generate debate among intelligence scholars and ethicists. On one hand, the mission saved lives and extracted valuable intelligence without violence or civilian casualties. It used guile rather than force, creativity rather than destruction. The deception targeted a hostile security apparatus, not innocent civilians. On the other hand, the operation violated sacred spaces and rituals, turning funeral rites into tools of espionage. It exploited Egyptian cultural and religious respect, using that respect against them. The participating rabbi knowingly conducted a false religious ceremony, a profound breach of religious law in service of a secular intelligence objective. The mourners, many of whom believed they were participating in something noble, were themselves deceived about the full scope of what they were doing. These ethical tensions reflect broader questions about intelligence work itself. Can deception be moral if it serves a just cause? Who decides what causes justify what methods? In the case of the fake funeral, the operatives believed they were fighting for the survival of their people and their nation. Egyptian authorities believed they were protecting their sovereignty and security from foreign subversion. Both sides could claim moral justification from their perspectives. The operation also raises questions about the boundaries of cultural appropriation in warfare and espionage. Is it acceptable to exploit another culture's sacred traditions for military or intelligence purposes? Does the hostile relationship between nations negate the obligation to respect cultural and religious practices? These questions have no easy answers, but they remain relevant as intelligence agencies continue to operate across cultural boundaries. The spirit of this operation echoes through Mossad's later legendary missions, from legendary prison breaks to daring rescues abroad. It embodies the agency's blend of ingenuity, courage, and an understanding that espionage is as much about human will as it is about intelligence. The broader legacy extends beyond Mossad to intelligence agencies worldwide. The operation demonstrated that unconventional thinking could solve seemingly impossible problems. It showed that understanding human psychology and cultural dynamics could be more valuable than sophisticated technology or large budgets. Intelligence services across the globe studied the operation, adapting its lessons to their own contexts and challenges. The fake funeral also influenced how intelligence agencies recruit and train operatives. The operation required people who could think creatively under pressure, maintain composure in extreme situations, and understand nuances of human behavior and culture. These qualities became more highly valued in recruitment. Training programs incorporated scenarios designed to test and develop creative problem-solving alongside traditional intelligence skills. For the Egyptian Jewish community, the operation held a different meaning. It represented a moment of agency in a time when they were largely powerless, a demonstration that even under oppression, resistance and escape were possible. The operation gave hope to others contemplating flight from Egypt, showing that the Israeli intelligence service had not abandoned them and was actively working to extract those in danger. In the quiet moments after the bustle of war and politics, This story reminds us that even in the darkest places, the search for life and freedom can follow the most unexpected paths. The coffin that once carried a daring escape now lies silent, a symbol of the hidden lives and untold sacrifices in a world of secrets. In an invisible war fought far from headlines, sometimes the most powerful operations are those wrapped in solemn ceremonies and whispered prayers. This story reminds us that even in the darkest shadows of espionage, human courage and hope endure. That survival often depends on creativity as much as strength, and faith as much as firepower. If this hidden chapter of history captivated you, share your thoughts below. Like the video and subscribe for more untold stories from the world of spies, statecraft, and the invisible struggles shaping our world. Thank you for watching.